Good evening, everybody. My name is Frank Connolly. I'm head of communications with SIPTU, the largest trade union in Ireland, and I'm also a writer and I've been an investigative journalist for a long time. So I've been invited by Ireland's Future to host this event this evening, a very important event which looks at the labour movement in the context of the debate that is growing in Ireland and indeed, as you all know, across the world on the question of Irish unity. We all know that the Good Friday Agreement of 1998 envisages the holding of referendums at the appropriate time, where people north and south will be asked whether they want to join a united Ireland or remain, in the case of those in the north, as part of the UK. The debate has taken off, particularly since the onset of Brexit and the decision of the people of the United Kingdom to leave the European Union. Of course, we know that most people, a majority, a very clear majority of over 56% in the north voted to remain. That has caused a trauma. And of course, on top of that, over the past 16 months or so, we have had, of course, the huge trauma and shock of the COVID-19 pandemic and the appalling loss of life and economic destruction that has wrought. In that respect, I want to introduce you to the guests we have here this evening. Patricia King is the General Secretary of the Congress of Trade Unions, the Irish Congress of Trade Unions, which represents more than 800,000 workers, north and south, from both traditions and none, and who is a voice that has been very effective, along with their colleagues in Congress, in ensuring that during this particularly traumatic period of the pandemic, that workers have at least been looked after, because of course over 1 million people across the island have lost their jobs and are only beginning to get back into employment. And of course we've had subsidies for industry that have been required to keep businesses alive during a very, very difficult period. And we're not out of the woods yet. Patricia will be talking about that and other issues. Paddy Lillis is the General Secretary of USDA, which is the largest union representing retail workers across Britain, and indeed has significant membership in the north as well. John Samuelson is the International President of the Transport Workers Union, representing 150,000 workers in airlines, rail and bus transit in the US. And finally, Mike Shingange is representing the Congress of Trade Unions of South Africa, COSATU as we know them, and is also the leader of the largest health and education public service union in South Africa. So I'm going to begin very quickly with you, Patricia, and just to ask you to reflect perhaps on the past year or so, and hopefully we're looking to the end of this, but we've had a really traumatic, and I want to ask you how workers have fared across Ireland, the members of the Congress of Trade Union in particular, from the pandemic.
Okay, thank you, Frank. Well, the first thing I want to say is that the pandemic itself has had a devastating effect across the island. Thousands of people have lost their lives, and many thousands more have contracted the illness and have become very ill, and in a lot of cases are not returned to good health yet. So I think it would be wrong not to recognise that at the beginning of any debate in relation to the pandemic. The second thing is that it has had a huge economic shock across the island, and lots of the economies, both jurisdictions, have actually been in suspension. And then there have been attempts over the last 15 months to reopen some sectors. Then we have a new wave, more lockdown, another new wave, more lockdown. And as we speak, we're again going into a hopeful stage that maybe we can reopen a lot more, but we're also threatened with a possible new wave. Now, there is a difference this time in that in the north of Ireland, they have been much more progressed in terms of their vaccination rollout. In south of Ireland, it hasn't been as progressed, certainly the beginning, as you know, There were a lot of faltering, false starts and so on, but it's now gained pace. And about 22% of the population have now been vaccinated. But the expectation is that by August, at least 80% of the population will be vaccinated.
I
Now,
just noticed, hey Patricia, just on, don't go moving it on about the pandemic payments that people receiving are now talking about being tapered off.
To deal with those economic shocks, we have we were in discussions at a very early stage with the Irish government and indeed with the Northern Ireland government on two fronts really. One, what economic supports could be offered to workers, and two, what safety measures would be taken in relation to workers in their workplace. And remember that alongside all of the workers who couldn't go to work or were advised not to go to work and work from home, you also had huge tranches of people as essential workers or frontline workers who were going in and actually, in a lot of cases, putting themselves at high risk to contracting the disease. So from the pandemic unemployment payment was paid in the Republic of Ireland as a support to those workers who were laid off and could not go to work because their actual work was closed down due to lockdown. And that payment, we were in there in the discussions with Congress, with the government in terms of the size of that. It started off as a payment in relation to sick pay, but then it was eventually, very quickly actually, extended to all laid off workers. So that was in the region of €350 per week. In the terms of, there was also employment subsidy to employers. So they would receive a subsidy on the basis that they would pay the full wage or a high percentage of the wage to the worker, and that they would receive a subsidy from the government directly in relation to the payment of that wage. And again, that has been utilised by a considerable number of employers, all of which was, from our perspective, and it was utilised right across Europe, it was to keep workers in connection with the workplace so that that connect was not lost, so that when the lockdowns closed off, people could actually revert very smoothly back to their workplace. In Northern Ireland, there was the furlough scheme, as you know, and we also entered into, on both sides across the island, we had very strong representations and indeed developed, I think, a very effective protocol for a safe working environment. And we, for the first time in the history of our state anyway, we got the government to agree that every single workplace, no matter how small or how large, would have to have a lead worker representative so that we could take ownership of the safety measures that were being taken in each workplace. And from our point of view, certainly from my own point of view, in their negotiation, that was really essential, that we weren't depending on the employer's version of safety. We were actually very clearly in the driving seat in terms of our worker, a lead worker representative, whether they were unionized or not was irrelevant. A lead worker representative would work with the employer to ensure that the measures were being complied with and that they were being implemented.
Okay, I want to come back to where we are now, Patricia, but I really appreciate that look back. And maybe, Paddy, you could tell us something in terms of the overall impact on workers across the UK, and particularly your own members, because the retail business has suffered all sorts of shocks. And of course, those workers are on the front line as well.
Yeah, thanks, Frank. And I mean, I reiterate some of what Patricia has said. I mean, in the UK, we're the fifth largest trade union, predominantly in the retail, warehouse, distribution and food manufacturing sector. And, you know, I want to put on record, I mean, my tribute to all those workers, you know, the health service who we know, excuse me, have continued to work and protect our communities, but also retail workers who have always seen as being the Cinderella industry, the industry that you do till you get a real job, and recognize that they kept the country moving and kept the country fed during this pandemic. And of course, reiterating what Patricia said, 127,000 deaths in the UK directly related to COVID. You know, it's shocking in any context, but every single death reflects on the families and the communities in which we all live in. So yeah, it's been difficult, but rightly so. The economy as well has taken a hummer. We've seen over the last 14 months over 200,000 jobs lost in the retail sector, 200,000 individuals without an income, which are now going to be subsidised by government, inadvertently by us, the taxpayer. And again, the forecast for 2021 is a further 200,000 job losses. So the pandemic has been devastating for the economy, but all it has done is accelerated the problem which already existed in the retail sector for the last 10, 15 years. We've seen online, the Amazons of this world coming in, the globalization of employers, the exploitation of workers, and the race to the bottom in terms of conditions. And without governments globally trying to tackle the exploitation of employers being able to offshore their profits, being able to avoid taxation, and subsequently what they do is they're robbing you and I. They're taking away from our health service, they're taking away from our education of our kids. So again, for me, the trade union movement stands globally, whether it's with ourselves, British TUC, the ICTU, the Welsh, the Scottish TUC, Uni Global, and all the other trade unions around the world, to stop the exploitation of workers and the sort of the robbing of countries of vital taxes, which keeps our country going. So for me, that's where I want to come from. And I look at where the international community actually makes a difference. And we'll come on to Ireland's future shortly. But in terms of, I look back, the one thing that strikes me, I think it was about 8 years ago, the Rana Plaza collapse in Bangladesh, where nearly 1,400 workers, mainly women, low-paid, exploited workers, lost their lives, and another probably 2,500. And we as a trade union put the pressure on the employers who were actually procuring their goods from these countries, exploiting the workers, to sign up to the Bangladeshi Accord, one that was done by the international trade union movement to ensure that workers don't have to go through that again, to make sure there's health and safety at work, to make sure there's inspections of buildings. There's real sort of evidence of how the trade union movement worked together, and hopefully again coming on to Ireland and its future, the trade union movements again as one of the biggest voluntary civic society organisations can make a tremendous difference there as well. So,
okay, we'll come back to that, Paddy, and thank you very much. Sorry, go on, yeah.
Yeah, so COVID's been devastating, but the retail sector has struggled for the last 10 years. And we have been calling on the British government to set up an industrial retail strategy, not for the COVID, not before, pre-COVID, but post-COVID. Look at the next 10 years. What do we want our communities to look like, our high streets to look like, our city centres to look like? What sort of jobs do the future we want? High paid, high skilled jobs. But how do we get to there? And we need government, local authorities, trade unions and communities sitting down together and working through a strategy. Of course, we all don't have all the answers, but if we don't start talking, then we're not going to get any answers. So to me, it's about sitting down and looking to the future. What does our country look like? What does the industrial sectors look like? And how can we all play a part and not using us? And we have, of course, in the UK, I've got a Tory government with a huge majority, which means they can do what they want. They were to bring an employment bill in to protect workers after Brexit. They didn't bother. And again, they're looking now to cut back on employment rights, which is where the Conservatives' default system is. So again, the movement has got struggles ahead, challenges ahead, not only in terms of the health pandemic we have at the minute, but in terms of these right-wing governments that want to continue to take advantage of workers.
Okay, and thank you, Paddy. We'll come back to those issues now, of course, when we're looking at the future. John Samuelson, can you tell us, obviously the United States has suffered, similar to the UK, a huge COVID crisis with a massive death rate. And indeed, only now with the new president, you could tell us perhaps a bit how the recovery looks like, or is going to look like, with the investment program that's being promised by Joe Biden's administration.
So right now we appear to be on the heels of pulling out of COVID-19, which I'm hoping is the case, across the entire world. The devastation here has been just unfathomable. It's over 600,000 deaths. The TW alone in our transport sectors have over 150 COVID-19 deaths Our urban centers have been hit particularly hard. Public transit hit particularly hard. But right now we appear to be pulling out of it. I think the Biden administration certainly has done the right thing thus far in terms of stimulus investment into workers themselves. In the transport sector, in fact, we were able to accomplish something that mirrors what was done across Europe, and that would be workers were maintained on the payroll as long as the employers took even a dime of federal money. And that is only a result of the advocacy of the trade union movement in the transport sectors in America. That type of arrangement has not been accomplished elsewhere. So we move forward. Anybody who's been anywhere in America understands now that the airline industry is bouncing back rapidly. It was just a couple of months ago where if I was flying, I would be perhaps even the only one on the plane in some cases. Right now, it's difficult to even get bookage on a plane in many instances. So flights are returning. In the airline industry, we've gone from the potential of tens of thousands of layoffs to actually companies like American Airlines rapidly hiring right now. Public transit, it's taken a bit longer to bounce back, but the New York City subway system, for instance, had some record high ridership since the pandemic began, just within the last few days. Urban America is bouncing back. People are getting back on public transit, but public transit was extremely badly hit. We had some marquee public transit systems in America, like New York and San Francisco, that were really on the verge of just going out of business. No income because of over-reliance on the fare box. So no revenue coming in, and yet an obligation to get essential workers back and forth to work, whether it be in grocery workers in supermarkets or nurses and paramedics to hospitals in order to maintain society during this COVID pandemic. So transit workers are in many ways the unsung heroes of the pandemic response in America. I hope I covered what you're asking me to cover.
I think you did, John, and I think it opens up. We as Patricia would know, and we've had a devastating impact on the aviation industry here, and hopefully what you've said about recovery might happen. But I want to bring that issue of recovery back. But let's hear from Mike Shingange in South Africa, and Mike. Obviously, COVID has had a huge effect and impact on working people and on the population of South Africa. And I might ask a question as to not just the effect of COVID, but how it has affected the program that you have been engaged in with the ANC and the people of South Africa of rebuilding the country since the apartheid regime was brought down. And maybe you could bring both issues together, and obviously tell us what's happening to the members of Congress, to the huge numbers of members that you have in COSATU.
Well, thank you very much. And from South Africa, let me say good afternoon. It's not good evening as yet. But as you correctly said, and every one of my colleagues that have come here have raised, COVID has had a huge impact on the developmental agenda of the country, led by the government and ourselves as a progressive trade union. And thousands of workers have lost their job in all the sectors of the economy, the big retailer, big manufacturing, even to the parastatal or those who are state-owned enterprises. Whereas, like everybody said, we have seen our frontline workers, particularly the healthcare workers, who were tasked when we first went into hard lockdown level 5 in February 2020, be the ones who were out there to fight this COVID-19. You will know that in South Africa, the public health care system was not so good in terms of the staffing, in terms of the infrastructure, and in terms of the equipment that is needed, particularly the issue of medication. It was actually a public health system that was we're trying to get it up and running. But it was not ready, if I must say so, to deal with a pandemic such as the COVID-19. So it was a very huge problem for all of us. It was actually overwhelmed by the need for hospitalization by so many South Africans that needed to be hospitalized, as I said, with the few employees that are found there. many of whom have since contracted this disease. They've had to go on isolation. They have got to die. As we speak today, we have fewer healthcare workers today than we had last year because some of them have died. There's still huge anxiety. We are approaching a third wave. Just yesterday, the president have announced another lockdown level 2. We're already at level 1, which we thought we were getting up there. But now we're at level 2. We are afraid that because it's winter in South Africa, once again, the healthcare is going to have to be content with an influx of a number of South Africans going in there. So that's one problem we have. Secondly, as I said, that employers who have, particularly in the private sector, who have always looked to undermine workers' rights, who have always looked to retrench or lay off workers, have now gone on to use this pandemic to retrench workers with an excuse that says the business are not doing well. Others have taken advantage of the fact that workers who are over 6 or 60 years old or who have got comorbidities can work from home, or they are not required to come to the workplace. They now realize that actually can survive without these workers. So in other words, there is more fear in terms of the future of work in this country going forward post-pandemic. So the labor movement is gearing itself to try and campaign for new legislations that are going to accommodate what is called the new economy or a new normal post-COVID. For us in South Africa, the new normal should not be a normal that takes us to where we were before COVID-19, because, like I said, the healthcare system was not up to standard. It needed to be improved. We had a two-tier healthcare system, which was both private and public, but also the economic situation in the country. Before the COVID-19 hit our shores, the economy of South Africa was downgraded by the rating agencies to a junk status. In other words, sub-investment level. So it was an economy that was already shedding jobs. It was an economy that was already ailing. It was not growing. The unemployment was going up. So the COVID-19 has worsened the situation. We are barely surviving. We have tried as a labor movement, together with our government, to cushion some of the workers by making sure that the unemployed insurance fund gets utilized to pay for the workers who have lost an income during this COVID-19. But it has been so long. I mean, it is almost going towards 2 years now. Those insurance can only pay for such a period. Now it's what we're grappling with. You're talking about the ANC government trying to rebuild the country. Well, unfortunately, we have difficulty ourselves because the ANC government is not immune from what we will call a neoliberal agendas across the world. The austerity measures is on its high in the country. The policies of the IMF, recently the government had to go to the IMF to borrow money. And as you know, once you borrow money from the International Monetary Fund, it comes with the conditions and structural adjustment requirement, one of which is to cut the public servants into half, one of which is to freeze the salary of the public servants. We are now facing a situation where the collective bargaining in the country is under attack because employers during COVID-19, led by the government, by the way, has now reneged or walked away from a collective agreement that they will have signed, citing the unaffordability and so on. And those collective bargaining rights are serious fundamental workers' rights that were fought for by the labor movement during apartheid and colonialism. We are seeing now a reversal of those rights, and every employer, including the private sector, have taken a cue from government and are just simply walking away from a collective agreement. And that is a threat to the rights of the workers going forward. And as I said, those are the conditions that are put by the International Monetary Fund and many other multinational organizations that put conditions when they borrow money to any government. So the ANC, unfortunately, is struggling to ameliorate itself out of the entanglement of the global pressures that are happening across, when we talk class 10, between those who are struggling and those who are having. That's what for now, I could say. We have had the industry such as manufacturing not being properly assisted because it was our view that we needed to strengthen the manufacturing industry during COVID in order for it to utilize it to produce what we call protective, personal protective equipment, PPEs. Those the masks, the gowns, and all those things. That would have strengthened the local manufacturing industry. But instead, we saw us importing it from China, importing from India, importing from Canada, and everywhere else. And therefore, it came with a poor quality that was not enough quality enough in order to protect our people from getting sick. But also, it killed the workforce or the employment of the people in the local industry, which were supposed to be benefiting from such a
Okay,
process.
can I ask you, Mike? Okay, Mike, can I hold you there, because some of the things you said have an echo and resonance here. We, of course, in the Republic of Ireland went through a very difficult period with the IMF, along with the ECB, and what's called the Troika, the European Commission, IMF and ECB, not too long ago. But what I want to do is shift the conversation now, because I'm conscious of the clock. Patricia, what I'd like to ask you is, in the context of what's happened with COVID, in the context of what's happened with Brexit, and in particular, the discussion that Mike referred to as the new normal of building a society that is not going to go back to the past. I want you to put it in the context of your discussions that you're having, I believe, with the Shared Island Unit of the Department of the Taoiseach about how to build an all-island economy and how that would be of benefit to members of Congress and to the trade union movement in general. If you wouldn't mind moving into that one.
Okay, thanks, Frank. And I suppose to put that in context, I would say, I think that the pandemic has also given us an opportunity. And Congress set out its strong ideas in relation to this in June of last year, when we published a document entitled No Going Back. And by that, we meant we could not, across the island of Ireland, under any circumstance, can workers anymore tolerate going back to the old methods, the austerity measures, the terrible period actually in terms of pay cuts and everything else that workers went through. And as you know, we're starting to see now a conditioning process being developed, where economic commentators are out there talking about, well, where is the money going to come from to pay the public debt that has arisen as a result of the pandemic. From our perspective, we're saying, here is an opportunity to develop a new social contract across this island, in the first instance with both administrations. Here is the opportunity to say, let us have a functional operating housing system, which, for instance, we do not have at all in the Republic of Ireland. Here is the opportunity to say, let us put away forever the notion of huge sectors of our economy being low pay sectors. Let us have decent work. Let us have a situation where across the island, workers are entitled to collectively bargain with their employers to achieve that decent work and decent pay. Let us have a situation where we no longer have, as we do in Northern Ireland, where 1 in 6 people, adults, have no qualifications. Let us have a decent education system whereby everybody can aspire to have an opportunity and have the ambition to do their best in and have, I suppose, as we all know, low education qualifications are very definitively aligned with low pay and poverty and deprivation levels. So let us lift people out of that situation and have this new social contract. Likewise, with early years development, as we know in the Republic of Ireland, we have a very costly, inaccessible, really, system of childcare, and we want to change. And by the way, the trade union movement has been hugely, I think, impressively included and operating in organising childcare workers so that we can achieve that. So from our perspective, we have an agenda. We also have a big piece coming down the line in relation to our climate change and the reduction of emissions of greenhouse gases. That is going to cause quite a transformation of the economy across the island. But we need to have that based on a just transition and not having the most vulnerable and the poorest pay for that solution. So from our perspective, we set this out in our document, No Going Back, and we're saying, and we have met all of the politicians, political leaders in the Republic of Ireland. We have also done so, with the exception of the DUP, who won't speak to us in Northern Ireland, but we have engaged with all of those political leaders. We're also saying at our forthcoming conference, which will be in Belfast, we're saying to the political leaders, come into this conference and tell us what you're going to do about achieving that social contract. Because my own judgment, Frank, is that as we build a new social contract, as we lift people into a much better place in our economy and our society, it is a much better platform on which you build the conversation and the debate about the future of our shared island. So Congress is very engaged with the government discussions in relation to the shared island. That shared island discussion is dealing with all aspects of how our society across the island is built. And it's one of the, I suppose, objectives of that project is to deepen our understanding of what goes on at a micro level in both jurisdictions, and to start building a learning process. And I think anybody who thinks that they know everything that happens on both parts of our island, I don't think that's credible. So I think the value of the shared island project is that you build that understanding. But as you build it, political leaders, regardless of where they come from and what their background, what their thoughts are, they have to get into a space where they can see the value of building this new social contract. From our perspective, the Labour movement has a huge interest in this, has skin in this game, must stay in it, because if we don't get involved in that dialogue and influencing that into the future, others will take the place, and it will be a different dialogue with different results. So I think the Labour movement has a really strong reason to be in there, in the front line in that debate and taking part to influence all of those policy decisions.
Thank you, Patricia. And of course, the employers are also engaging in those discussions with you, and they see the future of the benefits of building the all-island economy, as it's called, where, excuse me, where infrastructure can be developed across the border over the coming years and strengthened, and where investment can be put into those areas, particularly in the north, which hasn't seen inward investment for decades in many cases.
Well, if you look across in Northern Ireland, 1 in 5 people in a population of 1.8 million, 1 in 5 people is in poverty. And those are the statistics. The last outing on that was the Rowntree paper in 2019, which gives us a very good insight into those economic statistics, which tell their own story. Now, of course, the employers have an interest. Of course, the employers want to see more investment. I welcome that, in that full employment in Northern Ireland and in the Republic of Ireland, there is no better distributor of wealth than decent wage and people being able to earn a good wage for the work that they do. So we want to see everybody employed. We want to be able to see people not being exploited, but getting a decent wage. So we would have some common cause with the employers. But one thing we need to know, if we left that stage just to the debate on the employers or the politicians, we know, do you think that the employers across this island are going to have any major interest in developing a strategy to eradicate low pay? They are not. So do you think that they're going to have any major interest in developing a new social contract, which will bring all citizens, all people who live across this island, into a far better place? If it costs money and it is not in their interest, they don't want it. But austerity showed one thing. Employers know that when people can't access a house, or can't rent, or can't have a home for themselves, ultimately it will fall back on them, because the pressure for increased wages rises and they come under pressure. They also know, and in the Republic of Ireland, as you well know, Frank, we run a 2-tier health system. If you have money, you get a prompt health service, if you don't have money, you go on a waiting list and you wait a long time. When you get there, you get a very good service. You know, we've had a cyber attack recently in the public health service. We haven't heard any major call from those who are able to achieve private health because they haven't been affected. It's the people in the public health service, lower income people who can't afford to buy the insurance, so health insurance. So we have an unequal society, and it's not always in the employer's interest to have that as an equal society, and they don't always want to remedy the inequities in our society. So from our point of view, the labour movement has a real strong opportunity to influence the policies that are developed, to develop that new social contract into the future across our island. And we also think that, and that is why we're engaging with all of the politicians, we think that they have a key role to play and they have to step up to the mark. And, you know, they have to stop this polarized political, banter that's continuing, because that leaves behind the development of a more equal society. You can talk about anthems and emblems and all of those things, and they're all very important, but we must lift ourselves into a place where everybody rises in this, and that we have a much more equal society, and that we all have a responsibility to do that.
And I think that echoes a lot of discussions we've had here on these sessions with Ireland's Future over months in terms of our health and education, improving, lifting living standards across the island. Paddy, what's your take on that? I mean, Patricia's outlined a vision almost of what Ireland should look like, and transcending indeed some of the noisier or sectarian voices that might be against that idea.
Well, Frank, I mean, the politicians need to listen to what Patricia's just said, because what Patricia has done in the last several minutes is set out optimism for the future, set out hope for the future, set out the fact that there is another way, and we can't go back to the same old where the workers paid the price. We look back to the banking crisis of 2008 when the bankers gambled with our money and the bankrupt the world, never mind the country. And workers had to pay with austerity for it. So it has to be a different, a new deal for workers. It has to be a better way of looking at it. We've got challenges facing the country, whether it's Ireland, Britain, or any other country in the world, with the pandemic. Of course, Brexit adds a different dimension to it, and especially in the island of Ireland with the Northern Ireland Protocol. And we've seen the tensions that's risen in Northern Ireland with some of the rhetoric of politicians. And what I don't like is what I've seen in Northern Ireland is whether it's a direct threat of violence or the veiled threat of violence to get your own way. Now, I've always taken a view, there's no problem insurmountable if you're prepared to talk. And a problem with the trade union movement is we want to talk. It's trying to get government to talk to us, and in some cases employers as well. But I think Patricia said it very clearly now, we need to get around the table, whatever the problem, whether it's industrial problems or it's border problems or country problems. The only way to resolve it is to talk and have everybody in the room. And if I look at where the Tories are at the minute, during this pandemic, they've used and name-checked the trade union movement all the way through the last probably 8 or 9 months. They've had us involved from day one, drawn the blueprint for health and safety in workplaces. They've name-checked us at every press conference. But why is that? It's because the trade union movement is a trusted brand. It's a trusted brand where politicians are not always trusted. They're always, there's always twists and turns with them. Why then do we just use during a crisis? We are one of the biggest voluntary sectors in civic society. We represent in Ireland 800,000 workers across the UK, 6.5 million workers across the world, millions of workers. We have something to say. We have expertise in our different industries, and we should be at the table discussing what the future of our countries look like, the future of industries look like. And it shouldn't be just about low pay and low skilled work. I mean, them figures that Patricia's just give there, 1 in 5 in poverty in Northern Ireland, 1 in 6 with no qualifications. I mean, we strive for equality for all, opportunities for all. And yet it's the working classes that suffer the most and end up in the basement. So yeah, I absolutely echo everything Patricia says. And that's why we play our part with the ICTU and with the trade union movement globally. We only do it by standing together, raising the concerns and not being frightened to raise the concerns. And I'll say this even in the Ireland context, and the border issue, there's no problem insurmountable, and we shouldn't be frightened of debate or discussion. We not always agree, but we can at least agree to disagree in a civilized way. But I think you can find ways to do when you get people around the table. The problem is some people don't want to come around the table.
Okay, yeah. And listen, Paddy, thank you for that. And John, I see with the photograph of James Connolly behind you, he would have also echoed a lot of what we've been discussing here. Tell me this, what is the impact of the debate about, you know, a referendum and unity, and of course the preparation for what an all island agreed island might look like? How is that resonating in the US? And I know you've got a background in Derry. What's your take on all of this?
So I think what's going on in America right now, and perhaps it was derailed a little bit by COVID-19, but we'll get back on our feet again and begin organizing again toward this effort. But there's an awakening in the labor movement in the United States, particularly the Irish Americans in the labor movement, which are really disproportionate to our part of the population of America. I think we're about 10% of the country, like 32 million Irish Americans or so. But the trade union movement has a really heavy density of Irish Americans, and we look at what our predecessors have accomplished. The McBride Principles had a big push toward getting American politicians, President Clinton and others, involved in the pursuit of peace in Ireland, the Good Friday Agreement. And this new generation of Irish American trade union leaders is certainly looking for ways where we can contribute to sort of fulfill the mandate in the proclamation of Ireland's exiled children in America. We take that seriously. Joe Biden is now the president of the United States, largely because of trade union support and the support of working people in America. He's spoken definitively in favor of a United Ireland. He's pro-United Ireland. And also folks like Richie Neal, the congressman from Massachusetts, are in place and in touch with the trade union movement about what role we can play and what role America can play going forward.
Excellent. And Richie, in fact, Richie Neal was on a previous video for Ireland's Future only a couple of months ago. And Mike, I know there have been long established links between South Africa and during your own freedom struggle and with Ireland. And of course, we all recall here as trade unionists the role of the Dunnes Stores workers, retail workers in Dublin, who led a campaign to and refused to sell South African oranges, which was a huge issue. I'm sure you recall all of that yourself.
Yes, of course, we recall. In fact, as I just said earlier on, Ireland was the only European Union country during the times that officially did not have a diplomatic relationship with South African government. There was no embassy representing Ireland in South Africa. The talks to have an embassy only started in 1993, October, when it was clear that South Africa was now moving into a democratic dispensation. And that office was only opened in 1994. So that's what we want to continuously, when we have an opportunity, to always pay our appreciation to the people of Ireland, in particular the workers and the working class, because it is those workers which put pressure on their governments, and it's also those workers that by their actions refuse to participate in activities on a job that is going to aid and assist the apartheid government to triumph. So indeed, in this process of unification of Ireland, and led by our liberation movement, the African National Congress, we think that given our own experience, when we came to from apartheid and colonialism, where we had a number of homelands, we had a number of independent states inside the country. We had to undergo a serious program of action to try and unify South Africa and dismantling all those homelands and those independent states into one South Africa. It has not been easy because partly it was divided in terms of color, in terms of race, but also in terms of the language that the ethnic language that people were speaking in South Africa. Now, we have made progress with that. We have now one democratic state, and we know the benefit of the United Nation. When a nation is united, we know the benefit of focusing on one economic development program. We know that the benefit of a nation that is making sure that it endears itself once again in the community of the globe. So our view is that we are going to do everything in our power that is necessary, particularly ourselves as a Congress of Trade Unions, to have a discussion with our trade union movement in Ireland so that we can share experience, but also we can be abreast with the practical actions that we can take in order to pressurize as either our government to do their part at the bilateral level or actually to be in solidarity with the working class and the downtrodden people of Ireland. We know we have not rested as a South Africa. When there was a Cuban blockade, when the Cuban Five was in check, we led the struggle until they were released. We are not resting today. When there's atrocity taking place in Palestine, because our icon Nelson Mandela told us that we will not be free as South African if there's any other country in the world that is not freed or any other people who are suffering out there. So our view is that we need a united island that's going to be prosperous, particularly that is not going to be dragged into different direction by those who seek to divide it for their own interest. By those who seek to see a divided nation so that it can be easy for them to exploit the resources and the wealth of the country and also the labor of that country. We need to unite as progressive in the world in order to make sure that we defend the interests of the working class.
Thank you very much, Mike. And Patricia, we don't have long left, but I just wanted to get some of your observations in relation to Brexit and how much damage. I know there's a row over the Northern Ireland Protocol and the DUP, and unionism has been very divided over what's happened since a Brexit process that they actually engaged in and encouraged. What do you see it in terms of the practical effects for North and South, what Brexit has done in terms of potentially damaging jobs and trade and employment?
Yeah, well, just Frank, from the outset, I suppose, of the debate, we were clear. We wanted no hard border on the island of Ireland, and nor did we want a border east-west down through the Irish Sea. And we were very clear about that. And I mean, obviously, there are the current issues arising in relation to the implementation of the protocol. Our own judgment is that, you know, the EU and the UK governments should be capable of ironing out the issues that are arising in terms of the implementation of that protocol, and that should happen sooner rather than later. And, you know, there are a lot, to some degree, it's been utilized as a political football, which is not in anybody's interest. The reality now is the UK has left the EU, and at the moment that, and as we all know from the day one of these discussions, the issue of Northern Ireland was a matter of great complexity in terms of access to the EU market. Now, you know, there is dual access here, and there is, in my judgment, probably, again, an opportunity to maximize trade opportunities for Northern Ireland because they have access into the EU market and they also have access to the UK market. On the face of it, that looks positive. From a practical point of view, there are issues arising about, you know, the practical on-the-ground implementation of that. And it's not beyond the wisdom of us all that we can come together and realize a better solution in relation to the problems that are arising. But Brexit has not been good. As we know, Ireland has had a very traditionally very close trading relationship with the UK in terms of, you know, in the food industry, in live cattle and live animal export and import and so on, all of that between Northern Ireland and the UK, between Ireland and the UK. We see a reduction in that trade activity at the moment. We see issues arising for Ireland in relation to port activity, and, you know, even the activity at Dublin Port has reduced considerably in relation to the UK. We're seeing interruption by virtue of the new customs procedures that are required. So none of that is in any way in the interests of free flow. Now, alternatives are being arranged, as in bypassing the land bridge to get the direct access to Europe. Because we're an island, we've always utilised this land bridge through the UK. Those alternatives that are being developed, obviously, you know, more time is required for people to do that, for those who are using transport to do that. There's a lot of issues that have arisen that need to be currently resolved. There are issues in relation to, you know, the chain, you know, in terms of retail and so on. I think it is possible there will be more job loss than we know about. To some degree, the pandemic came in and interrupted the Brexit piece. We don't know yet in the Republic of Ireland how many jobs are going to be lost in relation to, as arising from the pandemic, and we don't know how many will be directly related to Brexit, because a lot of our economy has been in suspension. So from that point of view, we don't know. But I do believe actually that it is possible to administer the trade issues without having the issues we currently have with the Northern Ireland Protocol, and to develop a much more positive approach that actually Northern Ireland is unique in that it has access to two trading blocks, i.e. the EU and through the UK. It behoves us all to see, can we maximise the opportunity there rather than to be in the negative approach.
Appreciate that. And Paddy, finally, just coming to a close now soon, could I ask, you also have been on the national executive of the British Labour Party, and you referred to the Tory government and austerity and what could come down the tracks. What is the situation in relation within the Labour Party in Britain about this debate that we are having here on a future and potentially united Ireland or agreed Ireland?
You're right, Frank. I've been on the national executive of the Labour Party was on it for 14 years and chaired it in 2016 when Jeremy Corbyn was the leader of the party. I also took part in a task force that was in Northern Ireland and the Republic, looking at whether the British Labour Party, one, could set up in Northern Ireland, and two, run candidates in Northern Ireland. And that was quite controversial because the party generally did not want to set the party up in Northern Ireland, as it does in England, Scotland and Wales, with constituency Labour parties. Of course, there was a potential court action against the British Labour Party for excluding the North, and a compromise was arrived at. And the compromise was that the north of Ireland could set up one constituency covering the 6 counties. Of course, I think in Northern Ireland you have 18 constituencies, 18 members of Parliament. Therefore, even though the compromise was one constituency for the whole of Northern Ireland, but on the basis of they weren't allowed to run candidates in local or assembly elections or European elections. And that's now been challenged as well. And the reason for the party not wanting to set up in Northern Ireland has been long held. That one, if you set up candidates to run in Northern Ireland, you're running against your sister party, i.e. the SDLP is seen as a sister party. Some people will dispute that, but you know, it was the Social Democratic Labour Party. It was a combination of the old Northern Ireland Labour Party, of which I was a member of and a member of LP 87. I'm meant to mention Frank, Paddy Devlin, the MP for West Belfast, is also my cousin and my mentor as I grew up. So, you know, political background there.
Interesting. Could I ask you, Paddy, though, what, in relation to the Good Friday Agreement and the commitments made by what was then the British government under Labour, how do you see exercising this vision in the agreement that there would be referendums on both sides of the border within a reasonable and appropriate time, and preparations made for United Ireland? I'm just wondering, is that discussion live in the Labour Party?
I don't believe it's as live as some people would think, but from my perspective, being from Northern Ireland, growing up during the 70s and 80s in the darkest period of the Troubles, we've got hope in terms of, although it's dependent on the Secretary of State when that referendum and that border poll is called, but I think governments and civic society have got to now put the machinery in place to make the case for a united Ireland in terms of its economy, its future for its people. and that'll mean the pros and cons. It's not just, you know, just the Republic of Ireland. I think there has to be a real debate around what does the island of Ireland look like in 10, 15, 20, 30 years? What does it look like for our children? Remember, the vast majority of people under 30 don't remember, they come up without the Troubles. Yeah, we need to make a case for what does the island look like in this globalization, this global world of ours. We've seen COVID now, we've seen, you know, the different tsunamis in terms of the bankers crisis in 2008. What can Ireland do? But it's not a matter of just imposing it on. It's about not, and people's calling for a quick poll. I think we need to set out clearly what it looks like, what the roadmap to it looks like, what the implications are for our economy and for our people, what the opportunities are for them as well, and how do we protect people's cultures? How do we give people the opportunity to express their cultural beliefs going forward? Again, I come back to my earlier comment, Frank. There's no problem insurmountable who are prepared to talk to it. There'll always be a small element who will not want to engage, who will want to threaten, who will want to sit the one side. But I believe the vast majority of the people in Ireland as a whole have seen now over 23 years peace and stability relatively in comparison to where it was in the 70s and 80s. Nobody wants to go back. It's no different to the economy and come back to low wages and insecure wages and insecure work.
I have to cut you back a bit because we are running out of time, Paddy, but I really appreciate that particular observation you've made there, and it echoes some of what's been said. Finally, John, I just want to give you an opportunity. I mean, you're from the union built by Mike Quill, who's from Kilgarvan in County Kerry, where my grandfather was born, and you, Mike Quill, growing up. What do you think is, what do you see as and you mentioned Joe Biden, he is a United Irelander, I suppose, but he's also the president of the United States and he has strategic interests, including with Britain. What do you think are the concrete steps that are needed now to push this conversation forward? And as Paddy said, to do it in a way that does not cause disharmony or a return to the past.
So from the perspective of the trade unions in America, as we just emerge from the physical and economic disaster of COVID-19, there's real serious political organizing to go on. And as I mentioned Joe Biden earlier, I never did mention the Secretary of Labor, Marty Walsh, from Boston. His parents, I believe, are from Galway. So political organizing on the part of the trade union movement to force, to compel Congress, the Senate, and the President of the United States to use whatever influence they have, political, economic, every influence, to use the office of the presidency as a bully pulpit, if you will, in order to drive the agenda forward toward a United Ireland. And you know, I went to Ireland the first time in the early 90s. I've been there many, many times, post-Good Friday Agreement, on solidarity visits and whatnot, including with SIP2. And you mentioned Quill before. The name of our union is the Transport Workers Union. There's no coincidence there. Other unions in America are referred to as transit unions or some other version of that. And Quill named the union directly after the Irish Transport and General Workers Union, which is now part of SIP2. And you see the photo of Connolly behind me, and it's been mentioned, and it's there for a reason. Connolly's the father of industrial trade union organizing. Quill embraced that philosophy, came to America, formed the union in the New York City subway system, which had been impossible to organize before. Quill applied these principles and drove the union forward to the point where we are now today, 150,000 members. And these principles of trade union, industrial trade union organizing, we're going to drive this home in America. We're going to drive it home through political organizing in Washington, D.C. and in state capitals like Albany or state of Massachusetts and Illinois. Everywhere where there's a density of Irish population, we're going to use the influence that we have to drive the agenda forward.
Okay, and listen, I think that's everybody would agree that's a nice way to end, and particularly that history lesson. I really appreciate you coming on board. It's very early in the morning for John. It's in the afternoon for Mike, and hopefully we'll pull together another discussion like this as things move on. Thank you again, Patricia, Paddy, John, and Mike, and talk to you soon, and take care.
Thanks.
Take care. Bye-bye.